there was clear evidence that algorithms amplify extremism. It promotes extremism, it promotes negative emotions. That's what predicts virality. Once people learn that, oh, how I get traction is by posting low credibility extremist content.
A critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in this subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cult Conversations, The Influence Continuum, with Dr. Steve Hassan. And I have a very, very interesting scholar with me today. Vander Lindon wrote a brand new book called Foolproof: Why Misinformation Infects Our Minds and How to Build Immunity. Sander, I heard you do an interview for The Skeptics, and I was like, I want to talk to you. And I just basically read your book twice. It was that good. We have a lot to share with folks. It's going to be very, very helpful. Before we start, I just want to give your credentials, please. So you are a PhD professor of social psychology in society and director of the Cambridge Social Decision-Making Lab in the Department of Psychology at the University of Cambridge. Folks, that's England, by the way, not Cambridge, Mass. We have Harvard and MIT, but this is the UK. He's ranked among the top 1% of highly cited social scientists worldwide, has published over 200 research papers. I am in awe of that, but I'm a new scholar, relatively, compared to you. Your research has been frequently featured in outlets like the New York Times, BBC, Time Magazine, Rolling Stone. Your book that I just mentioned was named Book of the Year by Nature, the Financial Times, and Waterstones, has won several awards, including Harvard Goldsmith Book Prize and Best Book Prizes from the British and American Psychological Societies. And you were elected a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences this year, 2025. Congratulations, and thank you. So you are a social psychologist emphasizing research. Give my listen. I read your book, so I'm going to pretend that being the interviewer that I don't know this, but give us how you got interested in the topic. Let's set up the table.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for that generous introduction. Real pleasure to join you. I'm a social psychologist. I've always been fascinated by, why people believe the things that they do. And as an early child, I'm originally from Europe. My parents are Jewish, and as I write in the book, most of the family on my mother's side was executed during World War II. And so from a young age, when you ask questions like, oh, why don't I have as many cousins, or like, why don't I have, as many uncles? And so, it is something that's talked about. And I started getting intrigued by what motivates people to commit atrocities, and how does propaganda work? And then, you go to museums and you learn about family history. And so I started getting intrigued by the psychology of propaganda. And that ultimately led me to the study of psychology and how human minds work and how people interact with one another. And, it wasn't a thing that I worked on necessarily for, during my degrees, but it was always in the back of my mind as some of, an important topic for me to try to understand, why do people believe false misinformation?
Great. And you cite many people that I know personally and worked with. Bob Cialdini is just one of many experts, social psychologists and such. But we are now living in a digital age, and the whole topic of propaganda, misinformation, disinformation is so vital for people to have human rights, to have clarity of mind, to protect themselves. And your theory, which is, I'm not going to steal your thunder, but your theory is something I've talked about just as a former Moonie, that it felt like my mind got hacked by a mind control virus. And
Yeah.
so I actually, in the Cult of Trump, talked about mind control as a virus. Your entire book is
Yeah.
based on, epidemiological framework of immune systems, etc. Please share the framework with our listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's kind of three parts to the book, and they all follow the viral analogy. And the first is, why is the mind susceptible? And I think the key insight for me was that, look, you know, if misinformation can't find a susceptible host, then it doesn't replicate, right? And so then there's no point in the misinformation. So misinformation must be designed in such a way that it can replicate between people, right? It takes hold of people. It hijacks their basic cognitive functioning in such a way that it replicates and infects other people. Um, and if you look at the research that I kind of described in the book, it's we know that misinformation alters people's memory. So there's studies that show that if you tell people false stories about groups they don't like, for example, people go and say like, oh yeah, I remember that. But in fact, it never happened. You just it just fits with what you like to believe about someone or some group of people. It also kind of distorts our information processing in that we selectively attend to information that is congruent with what we may want to believe about the world. And it even sometimes actually takes over our behavior. I talked about this poor guy who during the pandemic just became obsessed with cable news, where he was being fed a steady diet about the conspiracy theory that the presidential election was stolen. Um, and during the trial, he ended up putting on militia gear and storming the Capitol. And afterwards, he said, I didn't know what came over me. It feels like I was, infected with a conspiracy theory that motivated me to do all sorts of things that had no history of violence and no history um, of mental illness or anything like that. And so that's kind of what I talk about. That sometimes, just as viruses take over a cell, right? They take over the host cell and they hijack the cell's machinery in order to spread. It's kind of the same. What happens with the brain sometimes? It takes over the basic machinery of the brain, our perception, our memory, our reasoning, our behavior, to try to live up to its pre-programmed goal in a way, right? Which is to sometimes, if it's misinformation, maybe to reproduce, but if it's disinformation, if it's intentionally designed, right, the goal is to influence and harm other people sometimes. And so, yeah, that's kind of part one. Should I pause there, or do you want me to?
Yeah, pause for 1 second, and I'll just say that, many people on this podcast know my backstory of being in the Moonies, but I just want to state the obvious. You do mention it in the book. There are state actors, whether it's America's CIA or Russia or China or Iran, that want to undermine the functioning of their enemies. And so they will deliberately craft troll farms and messaging to try to co-opt locals to then be the amplifiers and such. So this is part of my framework is psychological warfare that we're in the United States right now. It feels like we've been taken over by a cancerous virus sender, and so we need to. People are still in denial that it's as bad as it is, but I've been predicting this for a long time just because I've been studying this stuff.
And you've seen it coming based on your own.
Well, I was in the room with Sun Myung Moon in 1974 when he claimed to be the Messiah, and the Moonies are still around with a gun cult. He literally said we have to infiltrate the government, that democracy is satanic, so we need a theocracy. He literally said, when we take power, we're going to amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense for people who violate our rules. So, and as a fanatical, brainwashed Moonie, I thought this was a great idea. And I'm Jewish, too, and I learned about the Holocaust as a child, but I was believing things that were 180 degrees opposite of my real belief system and value system. So
Yeah, but
back to you.
that's actually a fascinating point. Just to riff off that, for example, because some people, sort of have this notion. Well, there's differential susceptibility in the population with epidemiological models, right? Which just means that some people are more susceptible than other people. But I think some people walk around thinking that we're just all kind of immune to that stuff. Nobody believes it, and it's not going to happen to me. I'm a smart person. But in fact, I think it's really, brave and powerful when people come forward and say, look, you can be a smart person, but a smart person in a bad situation or a smart person, that's going through something, anyone can be vulnerable at any given point in their life and become susceptible to radicalization. And I think
Exactly.
that's,
What we call situational vulnerabilities, death of a loved one, breakup of a relationship, graduating, moving to a new city, state, or country, and such. I just want to comment, a law professor, emeritus friend of mine and colleague, talked about the myth of invulnerability, that people walk around. It will never happen to me. The bullet will hit someone else in the war. It won't hit me. Or, I'm too smart to get into a cult, but people don't realize you never consciously join a cult and say, yeah, I want to be exploited and abused and separated from my family and friends. It's like just not the way it is until they meet somebody who says, hey, let me tell you my story, or they read a book or see a documentary or hear a podcast, and maybe it gets them sensitized.
The myth of invulnerability, I think that's exactly right. And there are smart people in cults that are just using their intelligence for different purposes. So yeah, I think the way sometimes people think about it is interesting. But yeah, in the second part of the book, it's a bit more, slightly more technical. But I was very interested in models from epidemiology to see if we can use the same models that are used to study how viruses spread in a population, to see if we could use that to study the diffusion of misinformation in social networks. And one of the great insights, I think, from that line of work is that those models actually fit really well. They do really well in terms of predicting information contagion effects. And it's remarkable that, sure, sometimes, so we think of it as a network, right? That there's links and nodes, and somebody believes in fake news and then spreads it to somebody else online.
Yep.
Then you become infected. You pass it on to your neighbor who becomes infected, and before you know it, the whole network is exposed. And sure, sometimes it's a simple rumor that people retweet without thinking. Sometimes you need a little bit more of a nudge before you become convinced. That's what we call the sort of threshold for activation, is that you need to be approached multiple times by people you trust before you decide to pass it on. But that's still contagion. It just works in a slightly sort of different way. The threshold is just a bit higher. And it turns out those models work really well. And I think the conclusion from that is that, well, if misinformation spreads like a virus, is there a way to inoculate or immunize people? And that's how we get to the third part of the book.
Right. And you talk about herd immunity as well. The fact that if we can get to enough people, it will stop a pandemic like viral thing that happens. It's fascinating. You talk a lot about conspiracy theories and modeling. And could you say a few things about conspiracy theories too? And then I want to get into part 2 and part 3 of the book.
Sure. Yeah. I do talk a lot about conspiracy theories. It's kind of how I got into this business in some way, because I started studying conspiratorial belief systems, and they're very interesting, and they share many aspects with other types of what we call monological belief systems. So there's really, it's a circular type of reasoning, and I think the underlying psychology, and people, what about Epstein? What about 9/11? What about this? I think from a psychological point of view, I'm not so interested in the veracity of any given conspiracy theory, but rather about the underlying psychology, which is this. Most people who believe in conspiracy theories don't believe in just one. In fact, belief in one conspiracy predicts belief in other conspiracy theories, and it becomes a worldview where everything is interpreted as part of a New World Order plot. Or there's a few different flavors. There's the anti-Semitic variants. There's tremendous amount of conspiracy theories that revolve around anti-Semitism. There's the ones that have to, are government sort of related. The underlying sort of tension is people don't like the government. And so there's a few variants, but they all have this sort of belief system. And in fact, we came up with an acronym called Conspire, because we tried to sort of figure out, okay, what are the building blocks? How can we talk to people and make clear why you should be a priori, you should be skeptical about any given conspiracy theory. I mean, they're kind of designed so that you can never prove them false 100%, because that's just the way they're designed. Of course, somebody's plotting something somewhere, right? That's trivial. But most popular conspiracy theories are completely ludicrous because they have these building blocks that repeat themselves. And once people start noticing that what we call the DNA, the kind of encoding of the virus, people start to think, hey, that's a bit weird. So conspire stands for incoherence, overriding suspicion, nefarious intent, something must be wrong, persecuted victim, immunity to evidence, and reinterpreting randomness. So, for example, conspiracy theories love to reinterpret co-occurrences into a pattern because the brain loves pattern matching. So, why 5G? Why are there more phone masks where there are more coronavirus-related deaths? Oh, the phone masks are causing COVID. No, it's because of a third factor that the brain isn't thinking of, which is population density. Where there's more people, there's more phone masks, right, and more COVID cases. And it's never the case that people are plotting to throw you a surprise birthday party, right? So it's always negative. It's always some evil actress plotting behind the scenes. And there are cases where that's true, but most of the time they don't have this sort of plot. Avril Lavigne is a clone. Tupac Shakur is still alive. Princess Diana faked her own death. Oh no, wait, Princess Diana is still alive somewhere. Right. And so they have this recipe that they use, and we give people these building blocks and ask them to create their own conspiracy. And after a while, people start to see, like, oh yeah, using just these few ingredients, I can recreate most popular conspiracy theories, which starts to sound a bit questionable. There's the one of my favorite examples is the birds aren't real satire conspiracy. Have you heard of that one? Birds aren't real. Yeah. That's a great one.
Yes, I saw the guy on 60 Minutes outing himself. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great one that kind of uses a similar structure. So, yeah, this guy came up with a conspiracy that birds aren't real. They're government drones.
Yeah, they're all drones. They were all killed. All real birds were killed off.
All real birds were killed a long time ago. The government didn't tell us, and now they're all drones.
Right.
But you can answer all sorts of powerful questions about this theory. Why do birds sit on power lines to recharge? Right? And it goes on and on. But it taps into real fears about surveillance, privacy, and so that's how the conspiracy theories that don't tap into issues that people care about, they don't go anywhere. Who built the pyramids, aliens. I mean, that's kind of out there. The stuff that gets people going is you have to hook into some real event, like a mass shooting, right? Crisis actors, and so in our interventions, in our research, we get people to engage with those predictable building blocks, and then people start seeing like, something's fishy going on here. A lot of the times it's completely inconsistent. So there's research that shows that when you ask people, did Princess Diana fake her own death? Or, is she still alive? People will answer yes to both because they don't care about the inconsistency. They just think that there's something must be wrong with the official narrative. And that's kind of the intuition behind it.
Right. So you talk about teaching the techniques, like you were just saying, the DNA of all conspiracy theories, but then also prebunking specific topic areas. And, again, I resonate so completely from a lived experience and working with clients for all these decades that if you can provide a theoretical framework that they can parse information into and go, oh, it ticks this box, or this alarm bell goes off, or this alarm bell goes off, And I'll just mention, I don't remember his name, but he's a former FBI official who would train people to go undercover. And in order that his agents wouldn't get converted into the criminal gang, he would explain a lot of the social psychological techniques. And he described it as, if you can name it, you can claim it. So he would be telling his people, when they do something nice for you, you want to do something nice back. That's called the law of reciprocity. Now we're quoting Bob Cialdini's work.
That's right.
If you can name it, you can claim it, so you don't fall victim to it organically. It's very, very good and very, very powerful. Please continue. Part 2.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's part of it, right? You want to help people recognize the techniques of deception and manipulation. If you can name it, as you said, that's very powerful when you're able to identify it, and that's part of the premise of prebunking and inoculation. So, prebunking, it's all about the idea of trying to prevent people from encoding misinformation into their brains in the first place. It's about inoculating, immunizing people beforehand. And, in some ways, it's so nice that we're intersecting, because you have a much more difficult job, in a way, of trying to de-radicalize people once they've already bought into a conspiracy theory or cult or manipulation. Whereas, I try to focus on preventing that from happening in the first place, because I know how difficult it is to get people out, and you probably know that like no one else. And so it's such a tough process, but they share some overlap, like getting people to recognize the techniques are being deployed on them. So inoculation follows, in brief, it follows the vaccine analogy, right? So just as vaccines introduce a weakened dose of a pathogen into the body, right? And to trigger the production of antibodies to help confer resistance against future infection. Turns out you can do the same with the brain. And so instead of just giving people, facts, it's really geared towards giving people a weakened dose of the types of manipulation, misinformation that might come across in the future, and deconstructing the playbook, right? Neutralizing that in advance, so people can build up cognitive antibodies and become more immune to it in the real world. And you can measure those antibodies. How good are people at discerning between manipulation and non-manipulation? How motivated are they? How good is their memory of some of these techniques? How well can they resist potential attacks? And we get ethics approval for this. And so we do attack people and see how resistant they are in our experiments. And that's kind of how we find out that this works. And it was a bit of a radical departure from the mainstream thinking in policy and elsewhere, that you just have to give people a fact sheet. Whereas we're trying to simulate an attack for people, right, in a safe, controlled condition, so that you can recognize it when it's happening to you. And we talked about conspiracy theories. That's one technique. Others that, we've talked about impersonation, right? Impersonating doctors, celebrities, politicians, official organizations, emotional manipulation, fear mongering, polarizing groups in society, trolling people. Elon Musk is of course one of the masters of trolling. Deflection and denial, sowing doubt about science. Big tobacco, fossil fuel industries have mastered that technique. Keep sowing doubt about science. And so we give people weakened doses of those techniques, along with ways on how to deconstruct and identify them, so people can build up resistance.
So you just triggered another thing I wanted to comment on, which is climate science denial, which you talk about in the book, about how there are 97% of the Earth's climate scientists say that human-caused, global warming is a real thing, and the industry, the fossil fuel industry, would make a petition and use bogus people, have no expertise in climate science, but it makes it sound like there's a group of people who really challenge this. And I'll just connect a dot for you. I don't know if you're aware of this, and it's something I didn't know about until this past year. But my former cult, the Moonies, own the Washington Times in D.C., and they have been the single biggest purveyor of climate science denial in the world.
I heard about
hired
that. Yeah, that's
by
wild.
by the fossil fuel companies to, that we need more research that's not conclusive, cycles of,
Yeah,
glacial,
yeah.
but it was all just plain money that the fossil fuel companies like Coke and corporations were deliberately wanting to confuse people so they didn't demand, climate change legislation.
Absolutely. And they borrowed that playbook from the tobacco industry. As
Exactly.
one
Exactly.
tobacco executive was quoted as saying, "Doubt is our product." And because I think it's like, and I've done a lot of research on this aspect because I found it so intriguing psychologically. One of the things that they discovered, and I think is also true, is that it is kind of hard to just convince people to adopt a different ideology. I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. It's much easier just to get people to doubt what they believe. And that was kind of their strategy for mass communication. Just keep sowing doubt. We don't know enough. We need more of this. We need
Right.
more models, right? It's not, and of course, the reason why you can't prove the link between smoking and cancer is that it would be deeply unethical to, have a group of people. You guys smoke 40 cigarettes a day until you get cancer, and then the control group, is doing some, a placebo. I mean, that's just not how it works. But over decades, we've established beyond reasonable doubt that smoking causes cancer through other means. But because it took a while, that allowed them, right, to
Decades.
sow doubt about the science. Yeah, decades. And as you said, I didn't know that about the Moonies. That's fascinating. But yeah, I mean, they need instruments. They need people to keep denying. And it's still going on to this day. What's so interesting to me, and I talk about this in the book, that the petition was from the 90s that faked the National Academy of Science template. And to be honest, when I was younger, I didn't know what the National Academy's template looked like. I would have been fooled,
Right.
right? And so that's what we call impersonation, and
Right.
that's borrowing credibility to influence for undue influence purposes. A term that
Right.
you like to use.
And you also
Uh,
mentioned in the book Andrew Wakefield. I read the book The Doctor Who Fooled the World.
yeah, another
This was
grifter.
the guy who was paid by lawyers to make up a phony causation model that vaccinations cause autism. And RFK is still spewing that nonsense. And it's been
RFK
debunked
is
over and
double
over.
downing, funding new research into the link. I mean, people have done this for decades, and this study was completely fraudulent. He lost his
Right.
medical license. He had undisclosed competing interest. He, reckless practice with respect to the children in the study. There was absolutely no link. Um, and still, scientists, this is how careful scientists are, still, even though there was no evidence, they still, for decades, tried to find an effect to replicate it, and they found nothing. I mean, this research has already been done for the last 20
Right.
years. There's no evidence. And he's pretending that this is a new question that scientists
Right.
need to be looking into. And it's wild. So
Yeah.
yeah, same playbooks are being recycled. And it occurred to me that, that's why it's so important to inoculate people in advance against these playbooks, because when you recognize it, you can resist it. And I use, I talk to so many people about, and some people have concerns about vaccination. And sure, talk to your doctor. If you have special conditions. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor. I mean, everyone should do what's in the interest of their own health. But what I would like people to know is the story that I often tell is there's this photograph this guy in the U.S. on a highway with a sign, on how the RMNA vaccine is going to change your DNA. The conspiracy,
Mm.
right? That the new COVID vaccines are going to change your DNA, and it's easy, right? Because people have questions about new technology. Who knows what something does to your body in the long term, right? Um, but turns out, if you go back to the 1800s, the first vaccine, the modern vaccine, Edward Jenner's cowpox vaccine against smallpox. What's so fascinating, and this is kind of the weakened dose that we would provide to people in an intervention, right, is that actually we show people paintings where, you have humans and then there's a cow udder kind of sprouting out of your eyes and mouth.
Right.
And they had fascinating propaganda, the anti-vaccine activists of the
Yeah.
1800s. Their whole spiel was that if you took the cowpox vaccine, you were going to turn into a human-cow hybrid. It was
Yeah.
fear mongering about how vaccines change your body. That was the 1800s.
Yeah.
Same thing today, 200 years later, and somehow we fail to anticipate these playbooks and those techniques.
And my theory, no proof, but my theory is a lot of these folks who are anti-science are fundamentalists who think the Bible alone is the truth with a capital T and are threatened by modern science because it says the earth is 4 billion years old or more, not 6,000 years. So it kind of challenges that inerrancy thing, just a theory of mine. If I may, I just want to comment because you are a social psychologist. I do clinical work. That's my training, but I've also just loved social psychology from my study of brainwashing and everything else. And you mentioned in the book as well, the Asch conformity study. And I'll just say, I use the Asch conformity study, the Milgram obedience study, and the Zimbardo prison study in all my cases to just give some theoretical frameworks to understand humans are social beings. We like to think we're individuals, but we're actually much more influenced by others. And you talk about some people want accuracy, some people want to be liked and to conform, etc. There's so many fascinating things. But the point I'm trying to get at is just because of Asch and Milgram, IRBs got instituted, internal review boards for social psychological research because of fear that doing research with human beings was going to cause harm, even though they did post studies and people, as traumatizing as it was to realize in the Milgram obedience study that they were basically electrocuting another human being because a guy they'd never met before in a white coat ordered them to. And they were both, post-Holocaust researchers, I might add. But it's so much harder with social psychology because of these review boards to do real-world experiments. But my final point on this is just, I think destructive cults are the impermissible social psychology experiments. Could you get people to put cyanide in their children's mouths under the proper conditions? And Jim Jones proved that you would, and so there's this robust amount of information out there that we could extrapolate from your inoculation approach to expand it to identity change, because that's my population.
No, absolutely. You're quite right that, IOBs now, we have to make trade-offs. In our study, we do expose people to propaganda and misinformation, so they have to, render a judgment. Is that worth it? We immunize people first, right? That's what makes it a positive sort of experience. And then we also debrief people afterwards. We follow up with people to make sure no harm is done. So, all of these guardrails are in place, of course, to ensure that the research is done in an ethical way, and that ultimately it benefits society more than any potential harm. But when it comes to field studies, the boards they're very hesitant about that. The sort of stuff about that Festinger did, inserting himself into a cult. I think it was the lunar
UFO cult.
UFO cult. That just can't be done anymore. And so that we have to rely on collaboration with clinical psychologists and experiences that are mediated. Because I don't think I do know a colleague who went to the Flat Earth conference and got approval for that to interview people. For a book, I interviewed former neo-Nazis, former extremists, people who were in cults, and I talked to them. But actually doing a study without their knowledge, I really don't see that happening anymore.
Yeah. So you mentioned Festinger. Festinger came up with cognitive dissonance theory, and that was the basis for my BITE model, was Festinger's thoughts, feelings, behaviors. You get someone to do an extreme behavior, they're going to rationalize it. in order to feel good about it. And I added information control and manipulation as the fourth component for how to evaluate whether a group is healthy or unhealthy. But anyway, talk to us about your Stop Bad News. You
Yes.
gamified research. It's fascinating and effective.
So, at the beginning, we had people come into the lab and they would receive the pre-bunk or the immunization, luckily without any needles.
Yep.
And then they would let them browse the internet and they were able to identify the techniques and not be duped. But then, we got some fair critique about how would this work in the real world where, people are not just going to come to the lab. And so, we also didn't want to do it in a way that would feel patronizing to people and this sort of being lectured to kind of way from some elite university. And so actually what we came up with was we decided to gamify the whole approach. We thought, what if we could do something fun for people that doesn't feel judgmental in any way, that is kind of funny and a little bit dark, actually, and kind of interesting. And we took some inspiration. One of the colleges here in Cambridge labeled us the kind of Defense Against the Dark Arts Lab. And so I
love that Harry Potter reference, by the way.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of funny, but Harry Potter, the books weren't necessarily my generation, and so I had to go and read. But I became fascinated by. I do like. It's more of my ode to Alan Rickman, the actor who played, of course, the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. But what I found fascinating about the analogy was that in order to overcome the dark arts, it wasn't like other classes where you had to study and memorize. It was more like you had to actually step into the shoes, right, of a dark sort of entity, learn their tricks from the inside out in order to overcome and defeat them. And so we took that inspiration and we created a simulated social media feed that allows people to step into the shoes of an online manipulator. And of course, in a safe way, so that it's all controlled, weakened doses using humor. But yeah, you make use of weakened doses of online manipulation techniques, polarizing people, floating conspiracy theories, emotionally manipulating your audience, and you learn how it works in a simulator, and that's what Bad News was really about. And you can make fun of anyone in the game. You can make fun of big corporations or the government. We do have some jokes about Trump and Musk in there at the moment, but actually it's about paying attention. So Trump. This is actually interesting because about 5 years ago, we created a joke for Trump in the game, something that wasn't true, but maybe he could have said, which was something like, annexing Canada as the latest addition to the U.S., which we thought would be a joke 5 years ago. Now, of course, we had to change it because he's actually saying
Not
stuff
funny.
like that now. Not funny. And so, but the Twitter handle of Trump is manipulated. And what's interesting is that most people don't catch this because they're so focused on the content of what he's saying and the sort of identity triggered by Trump that they don't see the Twitter handle manipulation. And so that's kind of the things that we explore in that simulation. I think what you said about identity is quite important because some misinformation is designed to appeal to people's identities. And so, for example, we have a polarization scenario where you can polarize people, but obviously you're going to be on the side of some issue. So people struggle with that a little bit. And so the narrator kind of goes and says, look, doesn't matter what side you're on. The goal is to polarize people in society, to create friction, because that's where influence can happen once people are more vulnerable. And so, so that went viral. It wasn't branded as Cambridge. It was just a game. It didn't have any instruction even. Some people were confused about what even is this. And so it was just very minimal, but I mean, the people who spend a lot of time online seem to like that sort of thing. And so it went viral and we got hundreds of thousands of people millions now, who go through that intervention. And that's, we tweak it, we update it, it's live, so we can respond.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's still online. Yeah. I went and stopbadnews.com, right?
Yeah. Getbadnews.com. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. It's free. It's meant to be a little sarcastic, open-minded, but the idea is that people come out more immune. And we've run so many experiments, using this intervention, find that people become better at spotting manipulation. And of course, we can crank up the level of manipulation,
Right.
so people wonder if we crank it out a lot, people become very attuned to manipulation. And some people wonder, okay, but what if the New York Times uses an emotionally manipulative headline, or the BBC? So our stance on that has kind of been, undue influence can come from anywhere.
Right.
So we'd rather have people think for themselves, but we could dial it down if people think it's too much. And so, because it's live, we can calibrate it, right? And we can
Mm-hmm.
work with people to see what audience, for what environment is the right level of skepticism and resilience that we want to give people. Um, and so, yeah, sources is fine. Media literacy is traditionally about which sources are good, which are bad, which is, it can be useful. In some countries, though, all sources are controlled and bad. And so, we're really focused on a lot of our
Yep.
content doesn't tell people what's true or false, but our measurement is actually how reliable, how trustworthy, how
Mm.
manipulative do you
Right.
find this headline or this post or this story? Because we want to help people calibrate their judgments and not necessarily tell them what's true or false. So yeah, that's kind
So
of
I
the idea.
meant to ask you, is the game available in different languages using examples from different cultures or countries?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've over the last years we've worked hard on that. So bad news is available in most major languages. There's a drop down, and you can pick your own language. Obviously, you wade into some sensitive territory. So we have, when the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, we did one in Ukrainian and one in Russian. People in some parts of Ukraine also speak Russian, of course, but there's
Uh-huh.
cultural differences, dialect differences, and so they're culturally sort of adapted. Of course, what we hope to achieve in Russia is get people to engage with propaganda techniques, and which is less of a problem in Ukraine. But there was some of it. But during a conflict, things get spun out of control. Same with Israel,
Yep.
Palestine. We have a Hebrew version that talks about propaganda techniques. And during conflict, it's important for people to recognize whether it's coming from a government or from your neighbor. To think about, hey, who's are people being manipulated to believe or endorse something so that they can make up their own mind? And again, we're very
Yep.
careful not to prescribe what people need to believe, but to empower them to make up their own mind free of manipulation. That's kind of the idea.
Right. Yeah, and the important thing also that I endeavor to try to do in my work is to teach people about confirmation bias, that we tend to believe what we already believe or want to believe, and before we like or share something, and you go into deep fakes, etc.,
Oh yeah.
before you like and share things, like double check that it's actually true, because I've fallen twice in the last 4 months for something AI that I didn't double check before I shared, because it seemed
It can
like the
happen to
credible actor saying the thing that made sense. And please go
It
ahead.
can happen to anyone. Yeah. We're supposedly experts on this topic, but when the brain is stressed out in terms of all the information that's coming at us, we're going to resort to heuristics. Does this look credible? Do I know the person? And so on. And so
Right.
yeah, in the book I described one example where my wife forwarded me something about NASA that was also a deep fake about the Mars rover landing. My brain was anticipating it because it was supposed to happen that week, but it just wasn't the right day, and somebody faked it, and I was like, "Oh, wind on Mars," but
Right.
it was totally fake.
Right.
They had taken real footage from a
Yeah.
previous landing and then some other wind footage and mashed it together to dupe people. Stephen King retweeted it. I blame Stephen King for this because generally, he doesn't tweet fake news, I believe, so anyway, but yeah, absolutely. And confirmation bias, as you said, and particularly with conspiracy theories, it's really difficult once people have internalized that into their belief system because they
Right.
they will
And
jump.
and
Yeah.
and you mentioned that you had some debate with Michael Shermer. Michael
Hmm.
and I go back for decades, and I interviewed him for his book Conspiracies. The one thing I liked about the book that he did was that he said, there are actual conspiracies. Like, don't think just because it ticks some of the boxes that it can't actually be a real conspiracy. For example, the Council of National Policy that Ann Nelson wrote a book about called The Shadow Network is a real entity of right-wing billionaires who wanted to destroy the liberal, secular, society. And that's what they're doing right now in the United States. But this was a group of people who have been meeting for decades, planning, we have to dismantle this check and balance, we have to dismantle this one, we need to recruit lawyers and so we can put them in the Supreme Court. This was a long game, but it's a real conspiracy.
I mean, I was on a podcast with two former CIA agents who used to create conspiracies for the CIA.
Wasn't John Cipher?
Yes.
Oh, it was.
That's right.
I know John. I was on the show too. Yeah, no.
There you go.
And he has an actual Q clearance that I thought was, because I studied QAnon as a psyop and all of that. But yes, this is another part of what I learned in my research for the cult of Trump was that there's something called fourth generation psychological warfare. Have you heard that term before?
Fourth generation? No.
Yeah, it was first written about in the 80s by a guy named William Lindon, an American military strategist. And it was used by the U.S. intelligence against other foreign governments, but then used on Americans. But it's an attack on experts, an attack on science, and an attack on democratic institutions, all to create confusion, uncertainty, to prepare the ground for a takeover or, installing a dictator to come in or whatever. And this guy, William Lynn, paired up with a Christian right guy named Paul Weyrich, to push this Christian nationalism and dominionism thing here in the United States. And Lynn met with Trump in the Oval Office in the first term. Like this is not, a conspiracy theory. This is a real, psyop. And so my thing is just trying to educate people. This is real. Like this is not just made up stuff. This is like.
No, I mean, people are plotting to do bad things. I think where Shermer and I perhaps differ is that he does have this attitude where he wants to investigate every claim of a conspiracy theory, kind of as a historian of some sorts, to sort of uncover it. Whereas I have a pretty strong a priori skepticism towards claims of conspiracy theories, because even though I know that, people do plot. My understanding of government generally is that one arm doesn't know what the other arm is doing. There's like bureaucracy is run amok. Completely disorganized. I would be very impressed if the government coordinated anything in great detail, years in advance. But also because of the underlying sort of psychology. So I think that the difference for me is that, when people believe in conspiracy theories, and this is what's so interesting to me, is that, kind of mathematicians have looked at this. For example, the moon landing was fake. They calculated this would involve 400,000 people working at NASA. The probability of these 400,000 people keeping a secret just goes to zero real fast. And so they look at all of these sort of major conspiracy theories, major scientific organizations somehow collaborating to keep this with thousands of members. I mean, they just said these models just show that there's no plausibility to those types of constructions of how most conspiracy theories work. And I do tell people that, a priori, the reasoning is often sort of epistemologically crippled in that, it's not open-minded sort of scientific theorizing. You start out with the conclusion, like somebody's plotting something. That's not how you start a scientific investigation. It's somebody could be plotting something, but here's also 9 other explanations for what could be happening. Many of them non-conspiratorial, right? We have to be open-minded about other scenarios and place weight of evidence on each of these. People ask me about Epstein all the time. I don't know everything about Epstein. Right? Nobody knows everything.
Epstein's hot right now as we're recording this on July 14th. The conspiracy has turned around to bite Trump badly at the moment.
And you talked about cognitive dissonance. How weird must it be to believe at the same time that he's hiding the client list and that somebody you voted for supposedly is also on that client list? That creates
Plus,
sort of
we have
dissonance.
pictures and we have recordings of Epstein saying how close they were. So it's not exactly that hard, big of a stretch.
No, exactly.
It's really fascinating. Sander, I could talk to you for hours. We only have about 10 more minutes, but I really want to get into the micro-targeting, using people's personal data to manipulate emotions, potentially change elections because of the AI at scale through digital platforms. And before you say anything, I'll just say much of your book, you had access to Facebook and you had access to platforms that since that time, it's gone away. So there's more opaqueness. So we don't even know what the secret sauces are back there. So please tell us.
No, that's true. A lot of the research is based on, when social media companies would share some of their data, even though they've not shared all the data before or kind of misled, sometimes perhaps unintentionally, intentionally, the research community by sharing only half the data, or, there's, supposedly privacy concerns, but, things can be anonymized. And so what we saw before, of course, was that looking at that data, there was clear evidence, which we found in our research, right, that algorithms amplify engagement that looks at things like extremism, right? It promotes extremism, it promotes negative emotions. That's what predicts virality. And that creates a very negative reinforcement kind of system.
Mm-hmm.
Once people learn that, how I get traction is by derogating other people, by posting low credibility extremist content. That's one thing. But then the ability to target people based on their digital footprints, right? So data is collected from each and every one of us based on what websites we visit. There's pixels in the browser that record your activity. It's shared between different companies. And so they mash all of that together in a big database. What are you Googling? What social platforms are you on? What websites are you clicking on? And some of my colleagues here at Cambridge have shown that what you click on predicts your personality traits and some of your lifestyle choices better than any self-report, better than your neighbors, better than your peers. And then it can
or
use
even
that
your wife in some
or
cases.
even your wife, your spouse, that one. You do need a high number of clicks for that. So it's based on how much data we have, right? So a few clicks will get you basic stuff like maybe your gender, identity.
The big
so
5 personality types, the ocean.
Those need a bit more clicks. At least, maybe 50, 100 clicks that we need in terms of, but the scary thing is that once you use those characteristics to target people with content, they've shown they can move people to buy, from buying shampoos to downloading apps to potentially the way people vote. And that's scary. And that was one thing. To some extent that could be audited because there was transparency. There were, public libraries of ads during political campaigns. And, now all these social media companies have downscaled, backscaled, all of those efforts. Right. They're not sharing data anymore. They've closed some of the APIs, or they made it, like Elon Musk, have made it unaffordable for researchers to get data. Even when you do get data, it's very minimal. So we don't know what's going on inside these companies. There's no transparency. There's no accountability. We worked with them on promoting interventions at one point that they've also now stopped doing because they're the ones who can reach hundreds of millions of people. Right. And they have scaled our interventions to hundreds of millions of people. But as soon as the political winds changed, they've dropped that and said, we're out. We don't have to do this anymore.
Well, they didn't want government regulation.
No.
That's why they backed Trump. They didn't, because Biden was, or Kamala Harris was going to regulate them. And there's been harm caused to children. Jonathan Haidt's work has shown that a lot of young people's minds are being negatively affected by being addicted to being
Yeah, here in the
online.
UK, we have the Online Safety Act, which is looking at online harms also to kids and teenagers. So many, even our students, they go on TikTok, Instagram, they see stuff from wellness, grifters, diet, body image, misinformation about so many things. It's concerning, and almost nothing is being done about this now, which is very concerning. But they've got it down to the level of nano targeting, which is targeting a single individual based on
Yeah.
their preferences. And with AI, Meta, for example, is now moving to maybe not. Well, let me say in general, I think a lot of these companies are now thinking about how can they leverage AI
Right.
to do the targeting, because the AI is going to collect once you log in, create an account. You know, Previously the problem was the context length; it couldn't remember that much about you. But
Right.
as these models are getting better, they can now remember tons of stuff about you and use that to target you with advertising. You said this a couple of days ago. Would you be interested in maybe clicking on this link, buying
Exactly.
this book? And they
Exactly.
can leverage that and monetize that. And
And we know
yeah,
Musk has hacked our privacy, in our government computer things. So
oh
all
yeah,
of our data is now aggregated, presumably with Grok AI. And apparently a whistleblower said that there was a Russian IP with some of the data upload. I could talk to you for hours. We only have 5 more minutes, but you have 11 antigens to
right.
help stop the spread of misinformation in your book. We won't have time to go through all 11, but get people excited to buy your book and read it, because I'm recommending it heavily for yourself, to educate your children, your friends, your family, your parents.
That's very kind of you, Stephen. Let me
Yeah,
let me stick to
I
the
mean it.
single most.
I mean
Well, you're
it.
kind of doing the single most important one that feels in the book, and that's we all got to pay it forward, because the way that we're going to reach herd immunity,
Right.
thinking extremely optimistically about this, but
Yep.
is what the best thing we can do is actually immunize our friends, neighbors, loved ones, and protect them by helping them identify the techniques of manipulation. And I think that's one of the most powerful ways in which the inoculation idea was used by social media companies, sometimes by governments, sometimes by places like the WHO or the UN. But we created it for and by the people. I think the ultimate, most stable way for it to be used is just regular people helping to immunize and protect each other from online manipulation and misinformation. So once you know the techniques, pass on that knowledge to other people, vicarious inoculation, if you will, because the power in being a social psychologist, I feel the power in the analogy is that a biological vaccine, you can't take that out of your body and vaccinate somebody else, but you
Right.
can do that with a psychological one. And I think that's the most powerful thing we can do.
Great point. And I'll just add, just like viruses you can't see with the naked eye, mind control viruses you can't see either. And that's where people need to understand the myth of invulnerability. We're all vulnerable because we're alive. We adapt. That's what the beauty of the effectiveness of the human species is. We will adapt, and information is how we navigate reality. Change the information, you're going to change the thoughts and feelings and behaviors of folks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And, it's, I feel like the cult movement is growing beyond proportion. So the work that you've been doing, it's ever more important. And I just I feel like we need as many people as we can to help fight misinformation rather than be silenced and censored.
Yes, thank you for that. And if you want to ever collaborate, I have a lot of ideas for how to scale, my work. And connect the dots. Because part of the reason I did my doctoral dissertation, frankly, was because I realized the law was out of date with understanding the human brain, social psychology, neuroscience, and only looked at minors or elderly people with dementia could be unduly influenced. But my world is like everybody's getting influenced all the time, but not necessarily having a total identity radicalization effect. but we have millions of ex-members, people who were born or raised in cults, whether it was a religion or whether they came from the Soviet Union or China, and they lived an authoritarian cult existence, and then they got exposed to freedom. You mean we can question our leaders and we're not going to be attacked? Now it's changing here, but that's how I grew up. It's like, yes, let's protest the war in Vietnam. Yeah. And so we really could expand your work, to this next level, because there is psychological warfare happening in a big way. So once again, the book is Foolproof: Why Misinformation Affects Our Minds and How to Build Immunity. Sander van der Linden is a professor of social psychology and society and director of the Cambridge Social Decision-Making Lab in the Department of Psychology at the University of Cambridge. Thank you for your good work, and let's stay in touch.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was a real pleasure, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, take care. Thanks.
Cheers.